The grocery store on a Tuesday afternoon is supposed to be quiet. That's why Vera chose Tuesdays. Fewer people, shorter lines, less of everything. But on this particular Tuesday in late November, the self-checkout machines at the Loblaws on Carling Avenue were all down except one. And the single-staffed lane had a line stretching back past the yogurt display. And Vera stood somewhere in the middle of it with a cart that held exactly what she could afford that week. 2 bags of frozen vegetables, a box of President's Choice macaroni, a liter of 2% milk, and a package of chicken thighs she'd already decided to stretch across 4 meals. Her son Kieran was beside her, 7 years old, holding the edge of the cart with both hands the way he always did when he was trying to be helpful without being asked. He'd learned to do that sometime in the past year. She wasn't sure exactly when. That bothered her more than she expected. The line moved slowly. The woman at the front was having trouble with a coupon. The cashier, a young man who looked barely 20, was calling someone on the phone, waiting, explaining the situation again. Vera shifted her weight, checked her phone, put it back in her pocket. Checked it again. She had $43.60 in her checking account. The groceries in her cart came to just under 41, if her mental math was right. She'd done the math twice in the frozen foods aisle, once more by the bread, and again just now standing in line. It should be fine. It should be exactly fine. Kieran tugged gently on her sleeve. Mom. Is that dog allowed in here? She looked where he was pointing. Across the store near the pharmacy section, a woman was navigating one of those motorized scooter carts, the kind the store kept near the entrance for customers who needed them. The woman was older, maybe late 60s, with white hair pulled back and reading glasses pushed up on her head. Beside the cart on a short leash sat a golden retriever wearing a vest, a service dog. Yeah buddy, service dogs are allowed. Why does she need a dog? Could be a lot of reasons. Dogs can help people in different ways. Kieran thought about this. Like how? Like, if someone has a seizure the dog can get help. Or if someone's blood sugar drops and they don't notice. Or if someone gets confused and needs to find their way. He was quiet for a moment. The dog knows all that? They train for years. He looked back toward the woman with the scooter. She looks confused right now. Vera looked again. The woman. She'd stopped near the end of the cereal aisle, holding a piece of paper in one hand and a box of something in the other, turning the box over and over. Her lips were moving slightly. The dog was sitting patiently beside her, watching her fuss. She's probably just reading the label, Vera said. But the line moved forward, and she moved with it. And she stopped thinking about the woman. It happened 3 minutes later, when Vera was 2 customers from the front. She heard it before she saw it, a soft sound, somewhere between a question and a small cry, and then the noise of the motorized cart bumping gently into a shelf display. She turned. The woman with the white hair had somehow navigated herself to the end of the checkout lanes and was now stopped, looking at the rows of open registers with an expression that Vera recognized immediately. Not because she'd seen it on this woman's face before, but because she'd seen it on her own face, in mirrors, in the months right after her husband had left. It was the expression of someone who was completely lost in a place they should know. The golden retriever was on its feet now, pressing its nose gently against the woman's knee. Nobody moved toward her. The cashier at the nearest lane was busy scanning items. A couple behind Vera in line glanced at the woman, then looked back at their phones. A stockboy pushing a flatbed of canned goods steered around her without looking up. Kieran, Vera said quietly, hold my spot for 1 second. She stepped out of line. The woman's name she found out later was Doris Campeau, 71 years old. She'd been coming to this Loblaws every week for 11 years. She knew where everything was, or she used to. Her daughter had explained it to Vera afterward, on the phone, crying a little and apologizing for crying. Early-stage dementia. Some days were fine. Some days the world went sideways in the middle of something ordinary, and suddenly familiar things didn't look familiar, and the list in her hand felt like it was written in a language she'd forgotten. Today was one of those days. Vera didn't know any of that when she walked over. She just saw a woman who looked lost and a dog who was doing its best, and a store full of people who had decided not to notice. Hi, she said. She kept her voice low and even. Are you finding everything okay? The woman looked at her. Something shifted behind her eyes, not recognition, because they'd never met, but something like relief. Like a hand had just reached down through deep water. I have a list, the woman said. She held up the paper. Her handwriting was loopy and careful, the kind of handwriting that takes time. I can't remember where they keep the. She stopped, pressed her lips together. I'm sorry, I know where it is. I know this store. Of course you do, Vera said. She meant it plainly without performance. What are you looking for? I'll walk you there. Cream of wheat. The woman said it like she was relieved to have remembered. The individual packets, my husband likes the maple ones. I know exactly where those are. Come on. They went together, Vera and Doris and the golden retriever, whose name turned out to be Remy, back down toward the hot cereal aisle. Vera found the cream of wheat packets. Maple flavor, individual serving size, on the third shelf from the bottom. She handed them to Doris, who put them in her basket and then looked at the list again. What else is on there? Vera asked. Doris squinted at the paper. Butter. 2% milk. Orange juice. The kind without pulp, because my husband doesn't like the pulp. My son doesn't like pulp either, Vera said. Doris looked at her properly for the first time. You have a son? 7 years old. He's holding my spot in line. She glanced back toward the checkout lanes. She could see Kieran standing very seriously at the edge of the cart watching her. When he caught her eye, he gave a small solemn nod. She almost smiled. He looks like a good boy, Doris said. He is, Vera said. He's the one who noticed you needed help actually. He pointed you out to me. Doris looked over at Kieran. Kieran, who couldn't hear them, gave a little wave. Doris raised her hand and waved back, and for a moment her whole face changed. The confusion went out of it. Something warm moved in instead. They found the butter in the dairy aisle. The orange juice, no pulp, was near the back. Vera walked with her, not rushing, not checking her watch, even though in the back of her mind she was aware that the line was growing, and she should get back, and she was on a tight schedule, and Kieran's school pickup was at. She pushed that part down. It would be fine. She would be fine. Doris was holding her list so carefully, like it was the most important document she'd ever carried. When they got back to the checkout lanes, the line Vera had been in was mostly gone. The young cashier waved her forward right away, apologizing for the wait. No need, Vera said. She got Doris to a lane with a wider opening for the scooter, made sure she was settled, made sure Remy was beside her and not tangled in anything. Then she went back to Kieran, who had kept hold of the cart the entire time without being asked. Did you help her? He said, yeah. She just needed someone to walk with her. He nodded, like this was obvious. Like the solution had always been obvious, and it was just a matter of someone doing it. At the checkout, Vera unloaded the cart. The chicken thighs, the frozen vegetables, the macaroni, the milk. She watched the numbers climb on the register screen. $40.12, she breathed out slowly. Fine. It was fine. She tapped her card, the machine beeped. The cashier looked at her. It's saying, declined. Vera felt the floor drop out of her stomach. Can you try it again? He ran it again. Declined. She stood very still. She had $43 in her account. She knew she did. She'd checked that morning. But sometimes the transactions didn't process in real time, and there was a pending charge from the utilities company she'd forgotten about, and... I'm sorry, she said. Her voice was very steady. She was proud of how steady it was. Can you hold these for a second? I need to check something. She stepped to the side, away from the lane, and pulled out her phone. Her hands were not shaking. She was very focused on the fact that her hands were not shaking. She opened her banking app. Checking. $11.47. The utility payment had processed this morning. She'd missed the email. She'd missed the email because she'd been running late getting Kieran to school. And she hadn't had time to read her emails and she'd miscounted. She'd been so careful and she'd miscounted. $41 in groceries. $11 in her account. She stood there for a moment and did the math again, in case it had changed. It hadn't changed. She could put back the chicken. That would bring it down. She could put back the chicken and the frozen vegetables, just keep the milk and the macaroni. That would be under $15. That would, excuse me. She turned. A man was standing behind her. He was maybe mid-40s, broad-shouldered, wearing a work jacket with the collar turned up. The kind of jacket that said he worked outside. He had the look of someone who was tired in a specific way, a bone-deep Tuesday afternoon way, and he was holding a basket with 3 items in it. A rotisserie chicken, a bag of apples and a liter of chocolate milk. I saw what happened, he said. He said it quietly, so Kieran, who was standing by the cart examining the candy display, couldn't hear. I've been there. I want to help. Vera looked at him. Her first instinct, her very first, immediate, conditioned instinct, was to say no thank you. I'm fine. I've got it handled. She'd been saying that for 14 months. She'd gotten very good at it. But she was standing in a Loblaws with $11 in her account, and a 7-year-old, who was going to need dinner tonight. And she was tired. She was so tired of managing it alone. I can't let you do that, she said, but she said it without the certainty she usually had. You helped that woman, he said. You didn't have to. You were in line, you had somewhere to be, you had your kid with you. You went and helped her. He paused. Let someone do the same for you. That's all this is. She didn't say anything. She was looking at his face. He had the kind of face that had been through things. Not hard in a cold way, but in the way of someone who'd carried something for a long time. There were lines at the corners of his eyes. He looked, she thought, like someone who understood exactly what it cost to say I've got it handled when you didn't. I'm Vera, she said finally. Glenn, he said. He didn't offer a last name. Just Glenn. I have a son, she said, gesturing toward Kieran, who was still very focused on the candy display. I'm on my own with him. It's been a hard year. Yeah, Glenn said. He wasn't performing sympathy. He wasn't doing that thing where people tilt their head and soften their voice and you can tell they're relieved it's not them. He just said yeah the way you say it when you actually know. I lost my wife 2 years ago, he said. Breast cancer. I've got a daughter 11. It's been, yeah, he left it there. They stood in the middle of the Loblaws checkout area, two tired parents in November, and for a moment neither of them said anything. Okay, Vera said. Thank you. Truly. Glenn paid for her groceries without making a production of it. He just handed his card to the cashier, put it on here, and that was it. The cashier didn't comment. Vera kept her face neutral, which she was also getting good at. When the transaction was done, she turned back to him. Can I ask, why do you carry so little when you shop? 3 things, is that a strategy? He laughed. It surprised her. The laugh, it was real, sudden. Like it had caught him off guard too. I come almost every day, he said. My daughter and I, we plan dinner together every afternoon when I pick her up from school. We pick one thing to make. Then I come and get exactly what we need. He shrugged. She likes the planning part. Makes her feel like she's in charge of something. Vera thought about that. A grieving 11-year-old who wanted to feel in charge of something as small as dinner. She thought about Kieran, who held onto shopping carts because it was a way to help. That's really good, she said. That's a really good thing you're doing. He looked a little embarrassed. It's just groceries. It's not just groceries. Kieran appeared at her elbow. Mom, are we done? Almost, bud. He looked at Glenn with frank, uncomplicated curiosity. Do you work outside? He said, pointing at the jacket. I do, Glenn said. I do roofing. You know what that is? You fix roof, build them mostly. Fix them sometimes too. Kieran considered this. Is it scary? Being up high? Sometimes. You get used to it. I don't think I'd get used to it, Kieran said seriously. I don't like heights. Lots of people don't. Doesn't mean you're not brave. Kieran thought about this. Then he looked at his mother. Can we go? I have to do homework, she said. We can go. She looked at Glenn. There were about 14 things she wanted to say, and no clean way to say any of them. Thank you felt too small. It felt like trying to hand someone a thimble when what they'd given you was something that would take a while to even fully understand. Thank you, she said anyway. Take care of yourself, Glenn said. He said it the same way he'd said everything else. Plainly, without fuss, like it was just a true thing that needed saying. They went out through the automatic doors, Vera and Kieran, into the gray November afternoon. The parking lot was cold, and the sky was doing that thing it does in late fall, where it can't quite decide whether to go fully dark, or just stay that muddy, discouraged gray. Vera loaded the bags into the back of her 12-year-old Civic and Kieran climbed into the back seat and buckled himself in, because he was 7 and he could do that now. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the car. Mom, Kieran said, are you okay? Yeah, bud. I'm okay. You're just sitting there. I know. I'm just thinking. A pause. About what? She looked at him in the rearview mirror. His face was so open. He hadn't learned yet to protect it, to arrange it into something careful. He just looked at her with his whole face, the way kids do. About how there are good people, she said, even on Tuesdays. He seemed to find this satisfying. He looked out the window. That man who fixed the roof, he said. He said I was brave even if I don't like heights. You are, Vera said. He's right, Mom. What? I think the dog was the best part. She started the car. Yeah, she said. The dog was pretty good. She called her sister that night after Kieran went to bed. Her sister Claire, who lived in Barrie, who called every Sunday and who Vera never told the actual truth to, because telling the actual truth meant admitting how close to the edge she was living. And she wasn't ready to do that. Claire picked up on the second ring. Hey, Claire said. How was your day? Strange, Vera said. Good, I think. Strange and good. She told her about Doris. About the list, the cream of wheat, the maple flavor because her husband didn't like the other kind. About Remy the golden retriever sitting patiently in the cereal aisle. About Kieran spotting it first, pointing without being asked, watching from a distance to see if his mother would do something. He's a good kid, Claire said. He is, Vera said. He really is. She almost didn't tell her about Glenn. She started to, then stopped, then started again. Someone helped me today, she said. At the grocery store, I had a moment where I didn't have enough. And a man I'd never met, he took care of it. No big deal, just, he took care of it. The line was quiet for a second. Vera, Claire said carefully, I know what you're going to say. I'm going to say you could call me anytime. You know that, I know. You don't have to manage everything alone, I know. She paused. I'm working on that. It was true, she was working on it. It was slow. The way it's slow to learn something that contradicts what you've believed for years. She'd believed, in some calcified and unexamined part of herself, that asking for help was a kind of losing, that holding it together alone was the goal, and the goal was the point, and the point was proving, what, exactly, that she could, that she was fine, that her fineness was the thing protecting Kieran from understanding how close the margins were. But Kieran had pointed at Doris. He'd seen someone in trouble and he'd reached for his mother's sleeve. He hadn't thought about whether it was his job. He hadn't stood there in that particular pose of studied indifference that adults had learned so well. He'd just tugged on her sleeve and said someone needs help, and Glenn, who had been to the bottom of something and come back, hadn't performed generosity. He hadn't made a scene. He'd just done the quiet, practical thing that needed doing, because he'd been on the other side of it and he knew what it felt like. And Doris, who had come to this store for 11 years and had her whole ordinary life written on a piece of paper, was going home to her husband with the right orange juice, no pulp. Small things, just small things, stacked up. 3 weeks later Vera was back at the same low blows. Tuesday again. She was in the frozen foods aisle, doing her mental math, when she heard a sound. A cart bumping a shelf, the specific small chaos of someone who had dropped something and couldn't quite get to it. She looked up. A young man, maybe 25, was crouched down trying to retrieve a can that had rolled under the lower shelf. He had a baby in a carrier strapped to his chest, 5-6 months old, maybe, eyes wide open and very alert, which meant he couldn't bend all the way down. He was doing this awkward semi-crouch, trying to reach the can without jostling the baby, and the can kept rolling further away every time he almost got it. Vera walked over. She crouched down, reached under the shelf, and handed him the can. He straightened up. His face was the particular exhausted pink of someone who had not slept more than 4 hours in a long time. Thank you, he said. Thank you so much. I don't know how it happens, Vera said. How old? He looked at the baby. 4 months. Almost 5. First one? He laughed weakly. That obvious? Just a little. You're doing great. She meant it exactly as much as Glenn had meant it when he'd said take care of yourself. She meant it plainly without performance. Because it was true and it needed saying. She helped him find the right baby formula. He'd written the name down wrong and couldn't find it and wasn't sure if it mattered, and then she went back to her cart. Kieran wasn't with her this time. He was at a play date. She was shopping alone, which was different, which was quieter, which she was still getting used to. At the checkout, she paid with her card. $52, which she had budgeted for, which worked out exactly. She drove home through the gray December streets, and she thought about Kieran's question. The one he'd asked in the car, after the Glen afternoon, the one she'd been thinking about in pieces ever since. He'd asked, with total seriousness, whether Remy the service dog knew things before they happened or just after. She hadn't had a good answer for him. She'd said she thought the dog learned to read signals, small changes in a person's body or behavior. Things too subtle for most people to notice. She'd said the dog paid attention in a way that most people forgot to. He'd considered this for a long time. Then he'd said, so it's like the dog is always watching. Just in case, yes, exactly that. She thought about that a lot. How much of goodness was just that, paying attention? Not some grand readiness, not heroism or moral courage in the abstract, but the simpler thing. Actually looking at the people around you. Being willing to see what's right in front of you and not look back down at your phone. She hadn't been any kind of special person that Tuesday with Doris. She'd just looked up, and Kieran had looked up first. Her phone buzzed as she was unloading the groceries. Unknown number. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something made her answer. Is this Vera? A woman's voice. Warm, slightly breathless. Yes, who is this? My name is Catherine Campeau. I think you helped my mother about 3 weeks ago, at Loblaws on Carling. Her name is Doris. Vera set down the bag she was holding. Yes, I remember. I'm so sorry to bother you. The store manager gave me your name. I hope that's okay. I asked if they had any way to reach you. I didn't even think they would. She stopped, gathered herself. I just wanted to say thank you. Properly. My mom told me about you. She told me about your little boy. She's been having a hard time lately, with everything, and she doesn't always remember things clearly. But she remembered you and she remembered Kieran. She's been talking about the boy who waved at her. She said he reminded her of my son when he was little. Vera didn't say anything. There was a tightness in her throat that she'd been getting better at managing, but that still came up sometimes unexpectedly. "I just wanted you to know," Catherine said. "What you did. It mattered. It really mattered." She was scared and you walked with her. That's all. But that was everything. After she hung up, Vera stood in her kitchen for a long time. The groceries were half unloaded. The afternoon light was coming through the window at that low winter angle. The kind that makes everything look a little gold. She thought about a woman she'd never met before, and would probably never meet again. She thought about cream of wheat packets, and a dog named Remy, and a stranger who paid for her groceries without making it a thing. She thought about her son, who held onto cart edges and waved at old women in grocery stores, and asked whether service dogs knew things before they happened. She thought about how the margins are small. The margin between someone who steps out of line and someone who doesn't. The margin between a day that breaks you a little and a day that gives you something back. The margin between "I've got it handled" and someone just put their hand out. She started putting the groceries away. In the spring, she called her sister and said, "I need help." Not for anything dramatic. Not for an emergency. Just, she said, "I want to stop managing everything so alone. Can we figure something out?" Claire cried a little. She apologized for crying. Vera told her not to apologize. It wasn't a perfect fix. Nothing was a perfect fix. But Kieran started spending every other weekend in Barrie, which meant Vera had 48 hours every 2 weeks that were just her own. And those hours were quiet in a way that her Tuesday afternoons never were. A deep down quiet that she hadn't realized she'd been missing for over a year. She started sleeping better. Small things stacked up. And every Tuesday she went to the Loblaws on Carling Avenue. Not because she had to. She could have tried a different store, a closer one that didn't carry the memory of that afternoon. But because she liked it. Because the cashier who'd been there the day her card was declined always remembered her name. And sometimes they talked about nothing important for 30 seconds before the line moved. Because she knew which aisles had the best light in the afternoon. Because sometimes she saw someone who looked the way she must have looked. Lost in a place they should know. And she could step out of line. She always stepped out of line. She thought about Glenn's sometimes. She didn't know his last name, and she hadn't exchanged numbers. And she would probably never see him again, and she thought that was actually okay. That some things are complete in themselves. A Tuesday in November, a rotisserie chicken, a man with lines at the corners of his eyes, who said, "Take care of yourself the way you say things you mean." She hoped his daughter was doing well. She hoped they still planned dinner together every afternoon. She hoped the apartment was warm and the chocolate milk was cold. And that the 11-year-old who wanted to feel in charge of something was finding her way through. That's the thing about ordinary kindness. It doesn't resolve into a neat ending. It just keeps moving, person to person, afternoon to afternoon, quietly doing its work in the spaces between the things that get remembered. Vera knew that now. She'd learned it on a Tuesday, in a grocery store, standing next to a golden retriever who was just watching. Just in case.